Hi, and welcome to the NewbQuest podcast. I am Matt Marafish, your host, and I am here today with Shawn Allen of Treachery in Beatdown City, who is a developer based here in New York. Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. And so maybe we can just start out, for those who don't know about you and about Treachery in Beatdown City, maybe we can just fill in some kind of basics on what that project is.
Yeah, I'm I guess an independent game developer in New York. I guess before all that I just draw. I used to draw and used to write a lot and became more interested in animating more, and then ended up deciding, after probably a really long time about wanting to make a game, I decided to actually try to do it. And Treachery Beatdown City is when it's done, it'll be the third completed game I've made that's like something people could play somewhere. It'll be like the first that I've put for sale somewhere.
Cool.
It's a kind of a side-scrolling beat-em-up mixed with turn-based RPG elements. I mean, some of those terms are a little bit like, there's a whole joke right now about the term RPG elements, like, because everybody like sprinkles that into everything, but it seems like to be the thing to do these days is to take, one genre and put it into another. And RPG elements just usually means like there's some sort of progression, you learn stuff, you may have like some story bits, which we have. Like, we have three main characters, and that are different types of characters, and they interact with, and fight enemies in the streets, and all the characters, including the enemies, have, their own personalities. And the beginning of the game starts off in like kind of a mirror version of New York, kind of that highlights all the bad things about people. And deals with a story that's kind of grandiose and stupid about the president Barack Obama getting kidnapped and the billionaire mayor not wanting to do anything about it unless the government gives him money.
Sounds familiar.
And then the chief of police calling his daughter and saying like, go get our mutual friends and let's go and figure all this stuff out.
Awesome. And so this is like the third thing, kind of game project that you're going to be completing, and your first commercial release. Have you worked in game development before this, besides working on your own projects, or is this kind of just diving in at the deep end for you?
In terms of building a game from the ground up, yes. I mean, I worked at Rockstar Games for about 5 years, almost 4.5 years, October 2007 to June 2012, and I was mostly working on trailers, doing like all the stuff that you see in them, like cameras panning while helicopters flying past and people jumping off roofs as stuff's exploding. That's all stuff that we had to make happen in the actual game space.
Yeah.
And then film it while doing all the camera moves and everything. So it was all very manual. It was all very interesting. And then, I did some assistant editing and After Effects work and voiceover and writing, and so all very kind of peripheral to actual game dev. But I've been doing a lot of game development analysis, I guess, if that makes any sense, like for a very long time. Like, I used to work at GameStop or EV Games or whatever, and like I would discuss things with people on that like level of like a deeper level that people are like, you're being nitpicky or whatever. And I've been I guess a critic of the critics for a very long time. Like, I would say like, why are you condemning this game for such shallow things? Like, why don't we actually talk about like the meaningful aspects of it? And NYU's around here, and they have their game center, and that's all for making a higher discussion of games in general, like chess, checkers, to Super Mario Brothers, to Grand Theft Auto or whatever. And going to their events, I learned that I wasn't crazy like that. I'm smart about what I talk about, and so I then that helped me. And then I did around January, February-ish of 2012, we did there's this thing called the Global Game Jam, which is you get a bunch of people, they show up to an event, and for 48 hours, probably less than 48 hours, Friday evening till Sunday afternoon, you work on a game. And you just meet people, and then you get a theme like 5 minutes before it starts. You go and come up with ideas, people pair off, and then you go make a game for the next 2 days. And so that was my first completed game project. We made a game called The Universe Within that we released, and it's in browsers, and it's also playable on iPad. You can download it; it's free.
Awesome.
And then another game a few months later for this other jam. It was called, and I was already working on Treachery and Beatdown City, kind of in the background as just a practice thing. I had been working on just a lot of different projects, and I really didn't know where any of them were going to go. And I feel like that The Universe Within, working with 5 people over 48 hours and being able to see some sort of role and bring something together, kind of convinced me to keep going. That I wasn't kind of stumbling. And then worked on another game with the programmer that I'm working on, Treachery and Beatdown City, with Manny, and it was we called it Glorious Ending Cinematic. It was for another jam called the Molly Jam, because there's this developer, Peter Molyneux, and he's known for, I don't know how to pronounce his name, and he says grandiose things about games. He's like, well, what if the thing doesn't exist in the box, or what if the ending? And then there's a parody account on Twitter called Peter Molyneux, and it's and one of the whole jam was about, you take a quote from Peter Molyneux and you say, well, what are you gonna expand on that? So my quote was, you start with the ending and you try to build the ending from there. So my game was a adventure game. I just kind of threw caution to the wind and just made something that was just kind of gross and quick just to make, and it was just kind of an adventure game where you have to pick from stupid options to try to create this really crudely animated ending of you being a character finding your girlfriend dead on the road and the cops thinking you did it, and then you hang yourself in jail. So I was saying let's make an ending that nobody wants to recreate, and that make you have to get to it.
Awesome. That's cool. So I mean, that's an interesting theme. So one of the themes of the podcast is to kind of offer pathways for people who want to get into game development or early in game development. And one of the things that definitely has come up is the kind of recommendation to do game jams. The thing that I have never done a game jam, the thing that has kept me from doing it is the feeling of I'm going to go there and everybody's going to laugh at me because I don't know anything.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I go places usually with a chip on my shoulder, just in the sense that it's who are you? What are you going to tell me? Blah, blah, blah. Because, I don't know, it is hard. You can stumble into an academic environment or something like that where people are really hot to try to do what they want, and it can be very intimidating. I think I was able to do what I did because I already knew a couple of people. I always think if you know there's a scene in your area, going to that scene and meeting people beforehand, because more than likely they will be the people at the thing, and then you could also say hey, the Global Game Jam or this game jam or whatever game jam's coming up, do you want to go together? And we can all meet up there, or are you planning on going? So then you don't necessarily stick yourself. But so the 3 of the, I think everybody that I worked with all kind of knew each other in some way. I knew 2 of the people. Yeah. And but I mean, yeah, because I had done this other thing also before that, which was very helpful, but it was also very expensive. There was a $300 some odd class that was like a weekend thing that was like mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, and it was
Hmm.
kind of a crash course in failing. Like it was like one of the key rules was fail fast. Like it was like, here's a card game, try to mod it. Uh, Whatever changes you do, try to do them, test it, see if you like it, then move on from there and keep building on it quickly.
Yeah.
So that helped me like really learn like the iterating idea of like ideas and implementation. But I also ended up working with like groups who were very anti that, who would get very bogged down in their thoughts. I ran into people who, like, I mean, I stumbled in a group that I think was doing okay, and people were, fairly smart about what they were doing and being very open, but I almost had to punch a guy for making a kind of a racist joke and not really realizing it. And
Terrific.
and then also I ended up in another group that we really weren't able to grasp something and finish. But that's the thing about game jams, is that it sucks because it's like, it is time, and time is very expensive, I think, with people. But it's not like you sitting down and hanging out with a friend and saying, oh, there's this idea I have, let's work on this for a year and see where that goes. It's more like, we don't have any ideas, we walk in. People are usually pretty open at these things. I still think like going and meeting some people beforehand is good. It probably would have helped me with that jam, because I know I blew off a couple of people who were like, oh, are you, like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm art, blah, blah, design. They're like, oh, we could totally use somebody like you. And I'm like, well, I don't really know these people. Maybe I don't necessarily trust their, judgment or whatever. But if I would have known them, I might have gone for a different group or whatever. And then just, go and just see. Sometimes I have I'll go to an event and say, like, I'll see how things are, and if the vibe isn't there, I just won't do the jam.
Right.
But I think it's important, though, to try to go to a public jam and not try to do a jam by yourself, because I feel like all of those insecurities that you normally have can't be assuaged by anyone else in a group if you don't have other people there. So, like, definitely. And I mean, people also have these ideas. Like, I mean, you talk about music, and people are always like, do I need to be able to do music? Or I have a friend who's an artist, and she's like, oh, am I integral to this? And I'm like, yes. Everybody needs art. Everybody needs sound.
Yeah.
Everybody needs the whole. If they can get the whole package, they're super happy to have those people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's definitely something I've thought about, is just going down and contributing predominantly music, and that's something I'm definitely like confident in my ability to do. I don't know. I guess it's the idea of the time pressure is sort of intimidating, but it's definitely something I've kind of made a personal commitment to go and do. And so when you did the Global Game Jam, you obviously were doing that locally at a place in New York. Where did they hold it?
Well, I guess that year, I think the NYU one was the only one that was something you could do. It's opened a little more. Like, I think SVA does one now, and I'm trying. I need to actually try to reconnect with CUNY and try to find one school to do another one at. Schools are always probably, I think, the easiest places to get it done because they already have space.
Yeah, totally.
And then you try to like. But yeah, I mean, NYU does it. They're going to do it again next year, I'm sure. SVA will probably do it again. That's like, the college campuses are the best. NYU's been very proactive about trying to get people to know they exist, so they try to do a lot of things there, and I think that's like a good trade-off. It's like you go in, and it's like you get the space. They try to get coffee for people or whatever.
That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I keep hearing about NYU-related stuff. The more I get involved with the kind of local New York indie game scene, they definitely seem to be kind of, pushing that, which is cool. So, talking about your project a little bit further, what is who's on the team?
Okay, so yeah, for me, it's like a lot of, I do all the key design work, came up with the concept, art, animation. Manny Marcano, he's the programmer, and without him the game wouldn't exist. And he, we talk about design stuff also. I ask him, his opinion, because it's very important to me. Uh, Diana helps out with a lot of the Diana Santiago, my wife. She's helps out with. She does production art. She designed one of the main characters, Lisa, and she, I talk to her about a lot of stuff. She helps me with like a lot of the art, just in terms of if she's not necessarily doing it and I'm doing it, I'll turn over and say like, "What do you think?" That's another like. I don't go forward usually without like her saying that something looks good. And this musician, Inverse Phase, he's a chiptune musician based out of I think Baltimore, Maryland, somewhere in Maryland, and he's kind of been a big key guy in the chiptune scene. Apparently, a lot of people know him. He helped like run this thing Magfest for a while, and so he does all the music, and he abides by me like having my own issues with the music from time to time, and giving him kind of vague, because I don't know, I have a weird, like I was a musician when I was a kid, and it didn't go past a certain point just because of like getting told like, oh well, like not being allowed to take a piano class because it was too expensive and no one was willing to give you a scholarship, even if the teacher said, no, you should give this kid a scholarship, he's really smart. And so so I have that inner musician in me that's I don't necessarily always just trust what people give me. And so like I talk to him about stuff, and sometimes we come back to what his conclusion, sometimes we like elevate it a little bit based on, like, I actually called him and hummed over the phone one day. And
that's awesome.
So like it's partially, a lot of it's very like me with a one-track mind, like I'm not gonna put something in the game but then also sometimes I just sit back and I say like, let me take 10-20 minutes and like look over this or listen to this song and maybe see if my gut reaction was wrong. And also spread it around, send it to people, say like, hey, do you like this song, hey, do you like this art, or hey, do you like whatever. So it's like I try not to be the megalomaniacal guy.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting topic, because when you're collaborating, especially with a small team, and there's obviously not like a huge budget where it's just like, well, I pay your check, so do it the way I say. That aspect of kind of balancing. Obviously, you have a kind of a distinct creative vision for the project, but then also kind of communicating that to the people that you're trying to work with, and then also allowing other people to bring their stuff to the table. It seems like a delicate balance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, like me and Diana, like butted heads quite a bit based on like the style that I wanted for the art. It was me looking at a lot of art that was like by a lot of great like Japanese artists for like beat 'em ups and stuff, and like even by like not great standards, because like old beat 'em up art was kind of weird sometimes. Like it was this airbrushed stuff that looked wrong a lot of times, like, and because all old video game art you were always like, were these people like artists, or were they just like programmers sometimes who were just like, but then they have this high level of execution, like this dude's muscles look like a photo, but then like the foreshortening or like his face just looks weird or off or something. So you're like what was the stuff behind it? So, and I really like that aesthetic. So then, but like Diana's not an airbrush artist. Like she doesn't usually do illustration at all. And I liked her paintings, and I liked her art and stuff. So I had to take a step back, and because I was being a real jerk about a lot of that stuff, and I had to take a step back and say like, well, I really like her art in general, and I need to trust that will work together for that. And the same thing with like music and everything. It's like music's especially. It's like, well, I'm trying to make it so that we're working together to try to make a sound, and not like, and yeah, like that vision is like I think also with email, sometimes you come off sounding more like a jerk than you are intending. Like if you say something kind of snarky. Like I told the musician, I was like, because I'm looking for very, like I kind of set a tone with a lot of different ideas, like Escape from New York theme and stuff like that. but in the same point, like he wants to do a lot of times like longer songs, and I don't want those. Like I want like 15 to 40-second catchy loops, because that's what old school games have, and it's not just because it's what old school games have. It's like I feel like in an old school game they had to express themselves in 15 to 40 seconds, and that might be very uncomfortable for someone who's used to taking 2 minutes to express themselves in a song. And it's like, it's not even like I'm paying per minute per song, but it's not even that. I'm not even looking for that. I'll sacrifice 20 seconds in a minute to get something to a tight 40 seconds, because I feel like, and I said this in an email, I said, well, you know, Super Mario Brothers is one of the most recognized like theme songs in a game, and that's because it's such a tightly made song. It's so catchy and it's so memorable that you can play it with any instruments. People remember it, and it's a song that people remember forever. Whereas like a lot of video game music in general is very meandering and very like epic, or just like has too much to say so that it doesn't say anything. And so like I want those like catchy guitar riffs or whatever in chiptune form. I want these things that it's like, oh, I remember that that's level 2 in this game, because that's how I feel like those songs for like older games were like that for me. And then the songs that don't achieve that, like I feel like those games fail sonically, like orally, like, so that became like a whole like, well, how do I know that this is a timeless song?
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like, but I mean, people really like the music, so I feel like, you know, the constant push-pull. I mean, there's even songs that are still on the back burner because the theme might not work. Like, it might sound a little bit like something else that, like, I hear it and I say, oh, that sounds like it doesn't belong in the streets. Like, it sounds more like it belongs in a more fantasy era thing. So we'll come back to that song later or something. So there's definitely a lot of push and pull there. And
yeah.
And it's like, but for that I am actually paying for music, like, so it becomes like whereas Diana, I'm not paying her much, so it becomes like she's my wife, and she's talented, but I'm not paying her anything. It's not like she's not the paid client work, like, so I have to give a lot there, and pretty much like take what I can get and know that it's great, right? Whereas with music, it's like, no, I'm paying for this. So it's like I actually have to be able to know that this is something that I want. But I also, you know, you still have the limits as someone paying for something. You can't make someone redo something because you're poorly communicating it. So it's definitely juggled there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that takes us to an interesting point. The retro aesthetics of the game. You know, obviously you're using chiptune music. You've got a kind of I mean, I would say an 8-bit style visual aesthetic, right? What sort of, besides your love of, you know, certain kind of titles from the past, were there practical considerations in that? Was it a purely aesthetic choice? What kind of led you to that style?
It's interesting. I think, I mean, partially before, like when I first started, a lot of the stuff I wanted to do was like this, like giant, hyper detailed sprites, like that are like, you know, super high def and stuff like that. And I realized, you know, 60 frames per second animation, all that stuff, and it's like one person can't do all that. Like they outsource that to other countries, to whole animation teams in other countries to do that. So that's not even like a laziness issue. That's like a, no, I can't do that, or else it'll take me the next 20 years to finish this. And I even see games on Kickstarter. There's a fighting game on there right now, Beasts of Fury, that it's like they had an Indiegogo and they paid for all the animation, and they misbudgeted and they didn't get to finish where they're at, and they're now doing a Kickstarter to continue it, and it's a lot of animation, and they're trying to do that, and it's like, if all you want is, like, I'm an animator, and yes, I love animation, so, but I also like look at it like, I was also, I think, looking for that timeless look, in a sense, like that kind of like, I wanted people to look at my game and like have nostalgia for it already, if that makes sense. And I think that's a little different than like than like just going for nostalgia's sake, but more like looking at it and getting this feeling like, oh, like this doesn't just approximate what I liked as a kid. This feels like a place that in a game that might have been made back then, like, even though it doesn't. And it's more about the iconicness and not necessarily, because I mean, I'm breaking color barriers, I'm breaking a lot of those things. Like, I'm not sticking to strict that any of the constraints. Although the music's all pretty much like done on an NES as far as I know. Like, it's all like Inverse is very all about that. And that's actually why I think I like his music, is he put out a album, Pretty 8 Machine, which is a 8-bit cover album of Nine Inch Nails, and each song uses a old soundboard. Like, it doesn't mix any soundboard. So I think that's why I was, when I first heard like his like cover of like CeeLo Green's like FU or whatever, and I felt like it had that sound. Like, it had this like, yeah, this was authentically old, not that it was like. So that's what I'm trying to go for, is that it's like the NES is weird because like a lot of like I don't actually have as much I have kind of a removed nostalgia from the NES because I didn't have one as a kid. Like, I played it at friends' houses, and I have this kind of memory of going to friends' houses and playing it there, and this like lure to want to dive deeper in. I used to read Nintendo Power, and reading Nintendo Power was how I really related to all these games. Like, I would look at these screenshots, and like I can still look at NES screenshots and say like, man, like that was like a world you wanted to live in, and they would make comics based on it, and you'd get all this depth there, and there'd be little cutscenes and stuff. So I feel like it's more of that. Like, it's this like yes, it is realistic, like limitations, yes, of animation and stuff. But I'm trying to be very specific about how that animation comes to be. Like, I don't want to be lazy with that either. I don't want to, like, as an animator, I have a big, I'm a big stickler for like walk animations. Like, if you don't bounce with your walk animation, then I don't like it. And there's a lot of retro people who do, oh, I'm going to do pixel art, and like, I don't necessarily think pixel art is inherently like a retro thing. I think it's a tool. It's a medium to make your style in. It's like using paint, and people use paint to do not everybody does Impressionism or classical Renaissance paintings. So I'm painting with like this weird, like, this is what Double Dragon would be if it was just a little better with the graphic style and just with a little bit more detail. Because like, I'm not repeating elements. Like, you had to repeat elements back in the day, and I'm not, because I want to make it very detailed. And again, make it like a world, like put all these little details in there. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't want it to be false nostalgia. I want it to be this like, you play it and you're just like sit there and you're like, oh yeah, cool, like this all makes sense to me.
That's awesome. No, I mean, I feel like, well, there's a couple things that you said there that I want to touch on. One is the idea of scope, which I think maybe we'll come back to because it's kind of a big subject. But something that you said there that I love is the iconic nature of the kind of low bit imagery, because it limits the detail that you're allowed to put in there. It kind of exposes a lot to the imagination, so that it's not, we're in an era now where there's this huge emphasis on realism, and people are trying to, render every particle and all this, and a lot of the time it just ends up kind of looking like these weird kind of waxwork things that are not real, but at the same time it's kind of real enough to prevent you from imagining anything else. And I think that's one of the reasons we've seen a lot of people go for this kind of more stripped, iconic aesthetic.
Yeah, that's I think the key that everyone keeps forgetting when they're like, why are the devs being lazy? And it's like, no, it's like, it I think is in many ways. I talk with Diana about this a lot. I mean, she's a fine artist. We both went to art school. We met in modern art through pop, like art history. So yeah, it's like, as if you look at the art world, like the art world goes from all these things, and it's like, yes, we are at the point where we have all this tech, and you have all these options, and the option, to make a game with pixels instead of polygons is the thing, and people are actually going for low-res polygon aesthetics too these days. There's like a lot of games that are coming out that look specifically boxy polygon-wise with low, or they have crazy shaders that could have never existed back in the day, with like these super low, and it's just that, I mean, yeah, I guess like I could have gone for more detailed characters in one instance, or higher detailed backgrounds, or something, or one of the other things. But like, I don't know. It's just not the brush that I wanted to paint with. Essentially, like I look at a lot of these things. I'm like, oh, I really love this part, and oh, I really love that part, and there's certain things about this thing that I like, and I try to, merge them all together. But it's also very easy to let all that get away from you and to end up making something that doesn't look like it's cohesive and doesn't like, because and it's your choice a lot of times. Like some people have this hyper like don't mix pixel densities. Like if you're drawing something on 1 pixel, then don't do something with 2 to 4 pixel densities. And yes and no. Like I feel like, I mean, people, it's like you have to pick your battles on a lot of that stuff, and you have to just look at your stuff. And I don't necessarily think that every pixel artist out there, I actually have high opinions about, like big opinions where I'm just like, I hate this person's art. Like I think this person's art is like low grade and bad, and then there's a lot of it in the scene, so then a lot of people see a lot of pixel games, and then they see a new pixel game, they're like, oh, they're just being lazy. And it's like, well, maybe some of the stuff that you were looking at before was like a person's inability to do something better or whatever. And so it comes down to this weird, like do you hyper criticize everyone's art? Do you look at it, I mean, I think the laziness aspect of it is that you wouldn't make, I don't know if making games is like anything that could be considered lazy. Because
that's what I was gonna say.
If you're a badass programmer and you can pump out games, I mean, that's high execution and skill. Like that's something not everybody has. Like games take months to make, and you may never make any money off of it. But if you're like I'd say the lazy people are like the Flappy Bird people who just steal something and put something up that.
Yeah.
Like if you clone all these games and you just do it at a very base level, but I mean everyone who's trying to do these pixel art games, they have some sort of love for this. They're not just doing it because it's simple. And I mean everybody has their own techniques on how to animate. There's like this whole this underworld thing going on about like people. There's sites teaching pixel art, and you look at these sites and you're like, oh, I learned one thing here, but I think most of what they talk about weighting and stuff is wrong. And then I mean it even comes back down to like just talking about animation fundamentals and all that stuff. Like it starts to get very technical very quickly, and like everyone has their way of doing it. So it's like if anyone was being lazy about it, I don't think we would have all these different like styles and techniques and programs that are built specifically for it, and everybody wants to know why your game doesn't look like this like $2 million game. And it's like, well, because I don't have $2 million to make that game and a staff of like 25 people. Sure, I might want to go for that one day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, and that's a great way to kind of move to the topic of scope. I mean, I think that this is something that, well, I think that everybody doing game development wrestles with, but I think is especially challenging for people who are inexperienced is, kind of looking at either looking at a concept or looking at a project and saying like, this, it's just me working on this, or it's me and my friend. This is something that we could, execute on and finish. I mean, how has that played out? I mean, it definitely the pixel art thing. I mean, I think one of the reasons we've seen a lot of pixel art games is, as opposed to kind of 3D. Obviously in the mainstream AAA space, we've seen a ton of, 3D has been very dominant. But anybody who's kind of messed with that knows it's just an incredible amount of work to get even simple, small amounts of 3D assets together. So I think from a scope side, you've seen people embracing 2D and pixel art and stuff like that. But how has that played out in your project, and how did you kind of think about that getting started? Considering the size of the project, how much you wanted to bite off, and kind of scope in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I first started learning pixel art myself, like I kind of boxed myself in very quickly because back in the early decade, 2000, whatever, this game Guilty Gear came out. Guilty Gear X came out, and Guilty Gear X was like a high definition game for the time. Like it was a 480p game that ran, like, all the pixel characters were like this big on the screen. They didn't look pixelated even on like a VGA monitor running through like a cable, because they weren't running at like 320 by 240. They were running at a double resolution. All the stuff was drawn. And so when I first started, I was like, oh, I made like a character that was like this big and was running, and I liked him. He was very expressive. And then I was like, no, this game, and this is like not the game I'm working on at all right now, and this was like, no, I'm gonna make this dude high res. And all of a sudden that like immediately like was like, well, like, how am I even gonna complete this? And I think that derailed me for long enough that I also had school and everything, so I was like, okay, let me go back to school and deal with all this stuff. And then when I started coming back to something, I was like, oh, I'm gonna make high. You always think about like make your first game like a smaller scale than what you think you can do. So I started making this game. I drew all this stuff, and I was like, oh, we're gonna make like I came back to the same thing, either giant sprites, giant artwork, or 3D like cell shaded Street Fighter 4-esque looking beautiful like animated stuff. And it's like, it's interesting because people don't really know, but like 3D animation at its core is a lot cheaper than 2D animation, just in terms of time, if you don't do it right, I guess, because most people just use kind of like 3D has a way that it's like if you put a hand here and put a hand over here, and you like it'll just move over that time. Like if you really want to get good at it, you actually have to start to get into it, but a lot of people don't, so they consider it to be cheaper. But coming back to even Guilty Gear, like they're now making like a new Guilty Gear that's all 3D that looks completely 2D because they're doing it frame by frame. But that's a team with millions of dollars, and animators get paid $90,000 a year at minimum. And for me, I was just like, no. So I kind of like threw everything away, and I just drew a sprite of the character Brad. After I had done all this like production art that I wasn't really happy with or whatever, I just tried to boil that character that was like this tall in a T-pose, and I was just like, let me just make him a simple character. And I took a lot of time of looking at styles that I looked before I decided to take that path. And then I was like, okay, well, let's just make him. And now let's make him walk. And now let's make him do all these things. And so, and I found that I could, get stuff done by trying to even just, by limiting my scope just in terms of like, I had to limit it within something that I liked. Something that I thought was doable for one person, like, because I'm the only person who's going to be doing all the art for the game. I mean, there's teams of multiple artists who do pixel art games, so it's like, and then coming up with this idea for this like beat 'em up game, the turn-based element kind of it sort of came from a bit of a technical inability at the time to get things to collide correctly at the right times, which has all been fixed at this point, but it's kind of moot right now because we really like the way that we were going.
That's interesting.
And so, I mean, it was, the gameplay change was actually shifted the game quite a bit, and it didn't make things easier, it just made things like something that we could go off and solve that problem later, and we still had to solve the problem anyway. So it just made the problem come back a little bit later that we still had to finish. And even still, I feel like we've bitten off quite a bit more than we can chew, just because I'm not being lazy, so I'm trying to make lots of different characters that all do different things, and I'm making backgrounds that don't repeat too often, and trying to add all these little things. And like each one of my backgrounds is, I try to make a 4 screen length background that is they're all widescreen, so they're not like like the 200. They're not like a square, which immediately a square with repeating backgrounds is nothing. Like you make a building and then you repeat it a couple of times. Whereas so making four lengths that are all different buildings or backgrounds or whatever, for me, the only thing that really repeats is the sidewalk. For me, that could take me 24 full hours to complete. Yeah. Like, that's crazy. That's not usually in a row, and that's not usually even that might be over the course of a week of me coming back. And that's a lot of it's like looking at, and I look at photo reference for my 8-bit art, and it's kind of like that thing that, like, it's sort of weird for me because, like, I like details a lot. So, and I feel like that's my artist thing, is I'm really all about like environmental detail and things like that, and like lighting and thinking about like color and all that stuff. So that kind of trips me up a little bit, and like it puts me also as like I'm the art director. So I look at things and I'm like, oh, I've redone whole aspects of the game because I'm like, actually some of that stuff doesn't line up correctly. Or our animation stuff is not the most complicated, but it's something that has to update a lot, and like I'm very picky about, and like if we're doing a lot of different throws and a lot of stuff, like, because I mean each character has like 30 moves or something, so they all have to be accounted for in some way, and the game's fairly in depth in terms of like systems and stuff. So like I don't know how I could get rid of more, but like I feel like I've already scrapped stuff that I think could have wasted me about 6 months that maybe like they would have tried to jam into a AAA game. Like I feel like every AAA game has to have a vehicle level in it for some reason. And I've cut our vehicle type stuff, and I thought it would have been cool, but was it going to enhance the core game? Yes, maybe, but as we see in a lot of bigger games that just throw a car in at the end of the game, like no. Like, you're always like, man, the thing that was good about that game was not the last level where you had to ride a bike and die every 3 seconds because you spent the whole rest of the game learning something else.
Yeah, totally.
You're doing a completely different thing now. So, I mean, I think in terms of scope, it's very easy to paint yourself into a corner. Like, I've seen a lot of games that, like, I mean, I didn't think I'd be working on this game at this point right now in my life. Like, I thought like I would have been a lot further along with it. And, stuff changes. Like, you find out that you're not happy with things.
So what was your initial estimate of how long you thought it would take, and how long do you think it'll take now?
I thought I would have been done, that we would have been done with the whole first level. Like, we're probably going to hit, like, about 5 or 6 levels. I thought we would have been done with that by October. But, like, technical issues and stuff kind of held us up, and just learning tools, and having a hurricane hit last October, the October before last, and pretty much knocking us out of commission for 2 weeks, that didn't help. And just, going to trade shows and stuff like that, like, and then having to, like, going to a trade show will knock you out of commission in that, like, you have a demo, so you're focusing only on this demo, and some of the stuff might be very demo specific, like you need the demo to end and then be able to restart. And so then you're taking your eyes away from the bigger thing and having to focus on the small thing, and then you're focusing on bugs that might only be inherent to this small little demo space. So all that stuff kind of, I wanted to be done with the first level by October, and then I think that would have like allowed us to, keep, like, once our full first level's done, then we'll be able to move on from there. And right now we're going to be rebuilding it all in Unity, and I'm aiming to be done with that. Like, we have a lot of the stuff from the first level done. We just need to finalize it, and it's very good to be like, oh yeah, we'll put that in, and then you get to the point where you need to put that in, and you're like, wait, you didn't actually. We had the idea, we have it all written down how it's supposed to work, but when you then say, yeah, put that in, and it doesn't all like snap into place, you're like, this is going to take a week or two, not like a day or two. And so, I mean, we're like, with the Kickstarter, I was like, February, March, so like less than a year from now, hopefully. Like,
cool.
Because I mean, it was easy. I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna have 26 enemies on the first level, and then
No big deal.
And then I had done like 8 of them, and then I had written down moves for like 10 more, and then I got to and I was like, wait, uh-oh.
It's easier to write things down than
Yeah.
it is to do them.
Yeah, and you have a chart, and you're like, okay, well, we have to make all these characters, and it's like, oh, well, some of these characters don't have anything done yet except for some concept art, and it's like, and then you start running into oh, well, I don't want this guy to punch like this other guy, so what else can we give him? And then you have to start thinking about what attacks exist in this world that can make this character different. And I've learned that there's not many ways to make someone punch, even though...
Yeah, totally. Especially within an 8-bit sprite, right?
Yeah, the whole expression aspect of it. Yeah, it's because in a 3D space you can have someone come out to the side and then move in, and that's different than if they just went straight forward. But yeah, trying to get a roundhouse kick that curves versus a roundhouse kick that just goes out almost looks exactly the same. I've had to scrap moves because they look exactly the same as something else, even with a separate intent.
That's interesting, yeah. And so you said that's something I wanted to talk about, is kind of the technology side. You're rebuilding in Unity. What did you start in?
We started in PlayStation Mobile, the SDK, which is this thing that's supposed to be for PlayStation certified devices and the Vita.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I got. It's how we started in GameMaker actually, and that's I don't know. It was kind of that was what was good about GameMaker was it was dump a background on. Okay, you got a background. Okay, dump a character in. You have a character. Dump left, right, up, and down on him. Okay, you can move up, down, left, or right. So to make that pseudo 3D perspective, all you had to do was make it look pseudo 3D perspective, and you could go up, down, left, or right, and you just had to collision off the rest of the areas, and you were able to get something running quickly. What's interesting about a lot of the engines these days is that stuff like PlayStation Mobile SDK, which is based on Monodevelop, which is what XNA was for Xbox Live Arcade indie games and stuff like that. That Microsoft killed, but Monodevelop is still the platform you can. But then iPhone and all these games, all these engines, all are 3D engines. Even if you're doing a pseudo or a straight up 2D game, where it's if you look at it, it's a dude. There's a background that's over here in 3D space, and there's a guy here. Even when you see it, and it's just overlapping. So then we had to build it out for the PlayStation Mobile, and that probably would have been that way for anything. But for Unity, we want to do that for PC because PlayStation Mobile doesn't run on PC natively. And you're using PlayStation Mobile SDK. It wasn't necessarily our first choice, but Sony was able to help us get up and running, and we were able to show our stuff at E3 last year, which is the big trade show, and
yeah.
At GDC, and they helped us get some press for that too. So going down that path for a bit has been helpful, just in terms of that they helped us, and we were able to work on that, and then but in order to get it to more platforms, you got to leave that behind and go into Unity, which isn't going to be so different, because it's still we've already moved on. GameMaker is very different from a lot of other things, whereas the PlayStation Mobile SDK, it's probably not as good as other things, so it'll be easier to put other stuff in there. But yeah, it was definitely a 3-month learning curve just to get it to run from GameMaker, just to get a background looking decent in PlayStation Mobile SDK, just because of stuff you don't know. We have our 8-bit art. When we first put it on the SDK, it was me being the art guy. I'm looking at it, I'm this looks sort of blurry, and it was because it was scaling, and it was in a lot of engines, when you scale something, it puts on some sort of filtering. So instead of it being sharp, it tries to scale it just like in Photoshop or whatever, and you have to go in and just like Photoshop turn on nearest neighbor for sprite scaling in. I didn't know that. It's just kind of interesting, learning all that stuff about that. Even there's correlations between Photoshop that I use to make all the art and then the program to put it on the screen. It has the same ideas, and we had to learn that and ask people about stuff, and I was freaking out. I was like, what's going on? And
well, yeah, I mean that's an interesting fact, right? About doing a kind of a pixel game where you want these hard, crisp pixels, which something like Photoshop or any of these programs will be like, oh no, we need to anti-alias that. We need to like smooth all these edges so it doesn't look pixelated, and it's kind of like actively working against you because it's sort of like in a different time frame. So I think what language were you writing in when you got to PlayStation Mobile? Is that C# for monodevelop?
C#, yeah.
Cool.
And GameMaker has its own thing. It's like
Yeah.
GML. And so C# will go into Unity also.
Yeah, exactly.
Although,
life
as
easier.
far as I know, like C# has to be converted to something else for like mobile platforms. Like C# apparently runs best only on like PCs. Mobile platforms use like JavaScript and stuff like that. I guess it's heavier. That's why I'm not a coder, because it's just like all that stuff. I'm just like, I don't care. I just want stuff to move.
Move and look crisp.
Yeah, move, look crisp, and do cool stuff, and be the game that I want it to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's cool to hear that you had a good experience getting some support from Sony. They seem like they have been pretty active in sort of trying to reach out and build a platform for a lot of indies in this most recent cycle, which is sort of encouraging to see.
Yeah, they're all the people that are working around that space they just like games, and they see so many great games coming out from people, so they talk to a lot of people and try to get their games on the platform. And I'm really hoping that does well for them. I'm personally, like, I don't necessarily think there's everything in the indie scene is great. Just like I think the indie scene is super important in terms of like getting some attention away from the bigger scene. And I don't even know what indie scene means really, but
sure,
like, I don't know. I mean, we just see all these games that come out that are just like, oh, well, it's super high realistic. And I was really hoping years ago that when tech was changing, people were going to be more experimental. Like you saw in the last gen with like Xbox 360, you saw like Crackdown come out, which was like cell shaded, and you saw even before that, like on GameCube and PlayStation, you saw a lot of cell shading, tune shading stuff, and it's only really in the independent space that you see stuff like low-res polygons with like a silvery, cool, garbled noise shader, and people actually trying to experiment with like graphic options and things like that. And it's really weird because you'd think people with money would be able to create something very trippy, but they don't. Every time they try, it always comes down to a realistic-looking dude who, yeah, might be kind of a cartoon, like, because it's a modeled character, but he still has on realistic leather jeans or leather pants, or like, you can see the stitching now, and it's like, but so does Bayonetta, like, right? She has like a leather hair thing, but then she's super angular, and I mean, but so it's like I think it's more the Western side too that really goes for this like hyper realistic, not very iconic, like kind of bogged down and just like realism level to everything.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, if it's not the heroes, then it's the enemies that just don't look distinct enough, or there's just something there where it's like I don't care about what's on the screen right now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like there's as we've seen, one of the reasons that people have put a lot of focus onto the indie scene is because you're seeing some stuff that has this feeling of, there's this kind of authentic energy where it feels like there's just some creative risks being taken, whereas if you've got, like you're saying, millions of dollars on the line, 30 people, 60 people, 100 people, 200 people, salary and mortgage on the line, everybody's like, well, what made money last year? Realism. Okay, yeah, let's get better water reflections. Okay, good deal, you know. And so when it's like you move to smaller teams and people are, you know, kind of doing budgets that are not so huge, it opens up a lot of that creative freedom. I mean, this is a little bit of an awkward segue, but it's something I wanted to talk about. You know, kind of speaking of budgets and stuff, you have just come through a successful Kickstarter process, and this was your second Kickstarter, correct?
Yep. It was it was interesting. You know, it's interesting. I get asked a lot of times, like, well, what's $50,000 going to do? Like, what's that going towards? And it's like, well, living, essentially, for two people, some music, which is, you know, not the cheapest thing. Like, you know, $250 a minute. Like, that's kind of expensive. And it's not the most expensive. It's not the cheapest. It's not like, and but I think it's valuable. I think I need it. I'm not gonna try to jam it out myself. Like, and it's something that's important to me. And that's not even including like art that Diana does, which is pretty much free. And probably like if I do like trailer work, I'm doing all the trailer work, and it's us trying to live for like another year. And I can't really bootstrap with like, I guess Kickstarter in a lot of ways was me bootstrapping with friends, but that wouldn't have pulled in, you know, 50 grand, which is like, you know, you subtract 10% for Kickstarter and Amazon, you subtract 10% for rewards. You know, there's some people who can get away with like non-physical rewards, and it doesn't cost so much. Part of any reward tier above the soundtrack tier goes straight to my composer, because I think it's right to, you know, he's going to be able to sell this whole CD when we're done on his site, whatever. But, you know, so I'm buying essentially at a highly reduced price each CD from him to give away for the Kickstarter, which I think is important because I want him to live too. He lives off of his music and does not live a very extravagant life at all.
Yeah.
And so it's like none of us we're all just trying to get through. And it's interesting because, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, and people undervalue themselves, their worth, they undervalue their time. And, you know, Kickstarter, in a lot of ways, it's like people want a game. And sometimes you can convince somebody, you could say, oh, we're trying to finish a demo, and when we finish the demo, then we're going to try to do the game. And, you know, I've been working on this game for about 1.5 years full-time, you know, sunk in, like I cashed in my 401k for, which wasn't a lot, but like to, you know, continue to eat a little bit and pay for an LLC to be formed so that I don't lose everything if someone sues me because they don't like something I did in the game or whatever, or they think I stole their character or whatever, you know, like they can sue my company, but not me, and that's something that's important for that. And then, you know, Manny, he was like working 3 jobs before I was able to start paying him a little bit, and that distracts from the game, so that means the game's lasting longer and I have to live longer, and like it's weird for me because, you know, I'm at a weird crossroads that I don't think a lot of people are. Like, I mean, I'm married, I have a kid. My kid's not a baby, like she's 13, so I think a 13-year-old child has way more expenses than, you know, a 2-year-old, because they're a kid that lives in the world. And, you know, like both me and Diana grew up fairly poor. It's like we're not gonna leave her in like a pauper's life or whatever. You know, so you gotta take care of your kid. You gotta, you know, treat him to some clothes or some ice cream here and there. You have to pay rent in New York City, and our rent's not terribly crazy on top of like some people's rent, and that's good because I would have had to ask for way more money if I was paying like, you know, $2,000 rent per month, like. And it's just like thinking about all that stuff, but also the fact that, like, you know, I'll be paying myself like I paid myself maybe $10,000 last year, maybe around, you know, a little bit more than that this year, and that's mostly just to make sure that, you know, I don't go out of my mind, like, you know, that I can pay for rent and bills and blah blah blah, like. But people like to, in the indie scene especially, they like to deflate their budgets. They like to, or inflate, depends, but they like to like not count their time working on a game as any cost to the game. They're like, oh yeah, I lived with my parents and this game cost $10,000 to make, and it's like, yeah, but like, okay, you had no bills to pay and you lived with your parents or whatever, but I mean, like, what about personal cost? Like, people that you don't see, or maybe you didn't have any money to go hang out with your friends or whatever because you weren't pulling down anything, or, you know, I mean, it's weird that when you walk into an office, you expect to get paid like $40,000-$50,000, but when you work from home, you're like, no, this is just a effort of love. And I'm like, yeah, but you are your own boss. You are trying to put something out. And people like to brag, I think, about like, oh, well, this game only cost $12,000 to make. And it's like, yeah, but what about the other costs? Like, I don't know, like, if you seriously, and they don't think about like all the money like for eating or for whatever, and so it's like, for me, like looking at Kickstarter, like I would have liked to have been able to ask for like $100,000, and people would have thought I was out of my mind, mostly because people ask for like 20,000, and it's because they live with their parents, they have their own money. People like to claim they're not getting paid out of anything, or they're only paying other people. And I'm like, yeah, but they're only paying other people. Okay, well, they're paying other people. Someone's getting paid for this work. Everyone should be getting paid for all the work, like, at some point.
Yeah, and definitely. I mean, I feel like that idea that you can spend a year on something, even if you're like a 16, well, I mean, I don't know if you're a 16-year-old, but if you're like a total, if you're making minimum wage, a year is still going to be 10 to 20 grand. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, it's you could be making McDonald's money and paying yourself McDonald's money, and you're still, that's going to double your sort of fictional $10,000 budget. So I think that's a really great point, and I feel like I appreciate the fact that you're upfront about, like, yeah, this is the money to cover my living expenses so I can dedicate myself to the game and put my full focus and energy, because, you know, yeah, I have kids too, and I'm not, you know, 20-something anymore, and like the idea that, oh, I'm just going to work 3 jobs and then come home at night and do a bunch of code on my game or write a bunch of music, it's just like, you are out of your mind. Like, it's I mean, I'm sure there are people doing that, and there are people doing great work that way, but if you're going to do a project of any scope, it's going to take you 10 years. You know, it's like, so I think that's something that people need to understand a little bit better. It's just like to really invest time in a project is it's like the most expensive resource we have.
Yeah, I also have this sense of immediacy. I don't know. I feel like when I got out of school and I went and, you know, and hopped into, you know, AAA or whatever, went to work for Rockstar, I keep like thinking back, and people keep saying like, when did you want to make games? And I'm like, you know, I think when I was a kid, yeah. I remembered recently that as a teenager I started actually like coming up with a plan to make like a game like Chrono Trigger, but huger with way more stuff, and I began drawing characters. I have them in a notebook somewhere. I still want to return to that, but I really always would run into this like, well, I don't know how to. I don't know how I'm gonna get past like and I tried to learn Flash programming, but every book that tried to deal with it was either like too obtuse or just too vague, and you know, the internet wasn't. I don't know. I didn't want to troll. I didn't have a computer until I was 18 anyway. So like I did a lot of Flash animating at a friend's house, and a lot of little Flash like cartoons and stuff, and maybe some music experimentation on stuff. But it was never like well, I have this forever, so I can go home and do this whenever I want. So I feel like I've been running behind schedule essentially like my whole life in a lot of ways. Like I wanted to make games when I was a teenager, but I couldn't figure out how to. And now that I'm an adult, and I was working at like a big game company, and I was like, man, and watching all these people bring their characters to life, and you know, putting out Super Meat Boy. Like, I love Super Meat Boy. I would have liked to have been able to make Super Meat Boy. And I know, like, you know, like Tommy and like a lot of people that I know, they they had worked 5 or some odd years already at a AAA company to get to the point where they were like, badass code wizards to be able to make something like that. But I mean, we're at this point where just so many people are like, oh, I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to go make this. And they do it. And I'm seeing games come out every year and you're seeing like the marketplace contract more and more and more. Like there's more people buying games, but it's like a lot harder to get seen. And I feel like if I hit this point where like if I keep waiting, like if I took 10 years to make my game would be 10 years too late, essentially. I already feel like my game right now is like, I think it's at a good point in my life in terms of like my own understanding of games and play and just society and education and stuff. I mean, there's another game that I started really wanting to work on that was like a comic as a kid. Also, as an adult, I started working on it and doing a lot of research, and like it deals with a lot of mature things, but I've grown in my life, so I've learned more about that story, and it's helped influence that. But so I feel like right now is the time where I need to do it. And it feels weirdly selfish because I know there are people who are doing their own jobs and are going places and, they're doing the thing. But it's like I did the GameStop thing for 5 years. I did school for 7 years. I've done AAA for 5 years. So it's like, and I've been kind of stewing over that time. And now I'm at this point where I don't think I don't know what I could do right now. Like, I want to make games. I don't want to make games for other people. And so I had to, put myself out there and say, like, hey, guys, I want to do this. I want to keep doing this, or else I really have to go get, like, a mind-numbing job where I don't know if I'll finish this thing in the next 2-3 years, and say, hey, can you throw money at it so that I can get it to you? And it's also weird because it's like, Diana, like, she's a fine artist, and she made a web series that's amazingly funny, and I want them to be able to, in the future, be able to find funding to do whatever they want to do, essentially.
Super tight. Everybody check that out on YouTube.
Super tight on YouTube.
It is super tight and very, very funny.
It's like I watched that happen. So it's funny. It's like I was watching all this stuff happening and all these people doing all this great stuff, and I'm like, man, I'm not doing anything. But like games are like this weird thing where it's like it's like a loaf of bread that you have to keep adding things to and baking over and over and over again for 1 to 2 years. Instead of like, yeah, you want to make a video program, you write it, you go make it, you film it, it's done.
Yeah.
Like, you make it over a year, you have a scope. There's no like, no one like people watch it in the end, they're like, is this boring? You might be able to edit it again to fix it being boring or not, but then it's done. Whereas like with a game, it's like, is this fun? Yes. Okay. Well, then keep making it. Is this still fun? Yes. Then is it? But then it's like, oh wait, I had this whole new idea, or oh wait, the tech issue here. That means we have to go back and redo the whole thing. So it's this weird, like, this me feeling fairly selfish, wanting to work on this thing for and it is very selfish. It's like it's my self thing that I want to do, but I'm just very thankful that people were like, yeah, we really want to support you in doing this. And, so it's like I can't forget where it came from. I can't forget that, Diana goes to a job every day that's like she's good at but doesn't want to be good at because it's not what she wants to do. Like, it's like she's an artist first and foremost, and that's me too. And I'm being very lucky that I'm being given this option to keep doing this, so I can't mess it up.
That's awesome, and I think honestly there could not be a better place to bring this to a close than there. I just want to say thanks so much for for talking with me and for being so candid and open about your own stuff. I wish you tremendous success with Treachery and Beatdown City. Everybody, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Before we go, where would you like to direct people if they would like to connect with you or find out more about your work?
Okay, there's New Challenger, NU, not NEW, and newchallenger.com is my site where I write stuff occasionally. It's like my company, whatever. Beatdowncity.com is the game. Just a New Challenger on Twitter and Beatdown_City. I talk mostly on a New Challenger.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, dude. It's been really interesting
you.
talking to you, and best of luck with the project.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
It's great
All right,
talking.
take it easy.